Recording.
I forgot about that. Whoops. It's okay, though. Live from the coolest home studio on the Hurrdat Sports Network, it is episode 104 of Generation Red. This is the show where family and fandom collide to bring you the kettle corn of Husker fan podcasts. And while it is always our goal to be sweet, there are times we get salty. My name is Ken, and I'm your host.
And I am Scott, and I am your other host.
And speaking of salty, our in-studio guest tonight is Ravi Lulla. He is the business operations manager at Hurrdat Sports Network and also hosts the Hurrdat Sports Radio with former Husker Damon Benning, whose last name I wasn't supposed to say, apparently. At least that seems to be a thing. It's from Monday through Friday from 7 to 10 a.m. on AM 590 ESPN Radio and ESPN Tri-Cities. Ravi, thanks for making the trek to Lincoln. Thanks for coming down to the basement. You can tell we don't skin teenagers down here, so there's a really good chance you're leaving here alive. But anyway, thanks so much for coming down. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. I think this is the best home studio setup in the Hurrdat Sports Network. This is quite the impressive little man cave you got here.
I appreciate it. It was a labor of love for sure. And I did not give the studio that moniker. Actually, Crew Gorman did from Hurrdat Sports.
There you go.
On our call that we did to re-up for this year to set up with Hurrdat. So business operations manager, how did that come about? Was that something that you've been since you've been at Hurrdat, or is that something they've added to your duties?
Yeah, so that's new. I started doing that beginning of March of this year. So I have always kind of worked a couple of jobs. My real job, quote unquote, is how my day job, kind of everything that paid the bills, was I've been working in risk management and fraud investigations and compliance for the last 12 years, basically.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so I've been doing radio on top of that the whole time. So whether it was filling in back at 1620 or when I started with Hurrdat, it was always on top of what I was doing during the day. And so it kind of got to a point where, I was talking to Bill, who owns the whole shebang over at Hurrdat, and he's like, I'm kind of looking for somebody to run some of the business side of what's going on at Hurrdat Sports so that Chris can focus on what he does more and Sasha can focus on content, because she does a great job of doing everything there at Hurrdat Sports. But, there's a lot of things on her plate that probably don't need to be. And so just allowing people to focus on the things that they're really good at, and then taking Hurrdat Sports and hopefully kind of taking it to the next level from a business standpoint. And so we kind of had a couple conversations, and it just sort of made sense. And kind of out of nowhere, that's where that started about. Beginning of March when I started. So,
wow, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. I know we had a conversation on the phone. What was it? End of March?
Yeah,
somewhere in there, because you reached out to me. Surprisingly, I'm sitting there listening to your podcast, and you're going off on Trev Alberts or some crap. And next thing I know, I get this message. I'm like, Robbie just texted me. Why is Robbie? What did I do now? And then you said you were the business operations manager. I said, oh boy, what did Crew do? And then I realized, no, it wasn't. It wasn't that. It was just kind of a reimagining of the direction that Hurrdat needed to go.
Yeah,
helping guys be more focused on what they need to be focused on.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, so Chris does a great job with a bunch of stuff, but he doesn't, I don't know that everybody realizes, he doesn't work just with the sports side. He works with the whole company. And so I think his role is like senior vice president. So he's senior vice president of the whole company, not just Hurrdat Sports. And so there's a lot of things that require his attention. And frankly, sports is just sort of a nugget of what the entire company does, right? And so it's obviously a real labor intensive thing, because sports just started about a year and a half, almost 2 years ago at this point, and it's sort of the new kid on the block in terms of the Hurrdat family. And it got to the point where there was too much to do to allow Chris to focus on all the things he needed to. And then Sasha, I mean, a year ago this time, I think there were 4 Hurrdat Sports employees, and now there's 22, I think.
Oh, wow.
And so it really exploded, and what has been on her plate has kept expanding and expanding as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so she's I think her title is sports director for Hurrdat Sports. So that's content. It's telling people where to go and what to do and what we're covering and all of that, all the logistics of getting the sports team out where it needs to be. And so my job kind of bridges the business side with the sports side of making sure that we can make money off of the great content that everybody over there makes, and B, that everybody is kind of able to do the things that they do best. So that's the big thing for me. And then also kind of just building relationships with people like you guys. I mean, that's why I reached out. That's one of the first things I did was reach out to the whole podcast network, just because it's a huge part of what we do. We love the podcasters, and I'm not just saying that because I'm here. They're a huge part of rounding out the coverage that we do, right? You can only have so many employees out covering sports and everything, but with the podcast network, it allows us to have a ton of different voices that bring a much larger picture to the network. And I love that about Hurrdat Sports, is it's not just, it's not just the reporting and the social media and stuff like that. There's also this really good pulse of the fans of Nebraska. And I think long-term, it'll be fans of not just Nebraska, but maybe more like regional and national coverage as well, that give us a really good opportunity to bring the voices of people who maybe otherwise wouldn't have a platform, but have a lot to say.
I got a question for you on that side, because I've always been kind of curious about. I don't necessarily need exact numbers from you or anything like that, but Nebraska fan base is obviously one of the best in the entire country. I'm going to be biased and say the best. But when it comes to the podcasting consumption side of things, you guys do have access to seeing kind of like numbers and seeing how much influence does podcasting really have on just a general population side. Is that something that once you kind of looked into it and saw the numbers, is it really truly something that is just consumed en masse by Nebraska fans?
Yeah, and that's the coolest thing about Nebraska fans, right? Is, I mean, we've got, I think, 8 Nebraska exclusive podcasts on the network, and then there's Nebraska football exclusive podcasts on the network, and then we've got volleyball, we've got softball, like there's a bunch of people that do other stuff too. I think there's about 23, 24 total podcasts, but 8 of them are basically exclusively Nebraska football with some Nebraska basketball sprinkled in there as well. And there's a place for all of them. The numbers kind of differ depending on, when people started and that kind of thing. But, like there's some that, okay, maybe they don't get a ton of podcast downloads, but they've got 50,000 followers on a social media platform. Or you've got they do incredible like Instagram and YouTube numbers, or you have some that do get really good podcast numbers. And so every one of them almost has kind of their own little like niche within the Nebraska fan base. And it seems like Nebraska fans sort of have an insatiable appetite and keep finding more things that they want to pay attention to and listen to. And so that's the coolest thing that I've kind of figured out is, if you look at just one metric, you're like, oh, okay, these few do pretty well, and then these maybe not so well. But then you look at it and you're like, oh, these guys do crazy numbers on YouTube, and these ones over here do crazy numbers on Instagram, and these people kind of chop up their podcast and put clips out on social media, and those clips all do really well, even if the podcast as a whole doesn't get a ton of downloads. And so there's obviously a market and an appetite for it pretty much for all of them. And I don't even think that's the other thing you have to remember here is we haven't been good at football for a while.
Yeah, no kidding.
Like wait until they actually start winning, and then this is an insatiable appetite with a team that hasn't been to a bowl game in 7 years. Like just wait until it gets going. I was a little kid when they were good in the 90s, right? I was 7 in 1994. So like I remember it, but like literally the first football game I ever remember watching was the Orange Bowl against Miami. Like that's the first game I remember watching start to finish. I had listened to a bunch on the radio that year, but that's the first game, right? That I watched start to finish. Sports were not a huge deal in my household, and I was a little kid, so like it wasn't a big thing. But so I remember that clearly. I remember the whole 95 season clearly. I remember the whole 97 season clearly, but I'm like 8 to 10 years old in that range, right? Like I can't even, and I was trying to tell all the people at Hurrdat, because most of the I'm the old man over there for the most part. Like most of the reporters are like 26 and under.
Wow.
And they're great. They're so good at what they do. But I'm like, you guys have no idea how good it gets around here when the football team's actually good.
Yeah.
Like when it actually gets rolling. Because, I was 14 in 2001. And that's probably, I was pretty aware of not just the actual team, but like, the narratives and stuff. Right. And so you're watching this thing happen, and it's so cool to see Nebraska be talked about nationally and be talked about in the same breath as, back then it was like Florida State and Miami and then those teams, right? Now it's Alabama and Georgia and Michigan, Ohio State, and just the ability to not even be able to imagine how much better it gets than we're at right now. And it already is a pretty cool thing to be a part of. And so I just can't wait, not only for myself personally, because obviously it's good for what I do, but just for the people that haven't seen it or weren't old enough to remember it, just to get a opportunity to realize how special this place gets when it's actually rolling, because it's already, you're right, it is the best fan base in the country, and we're not even good right now.
No, we suck.
Like that's the craziest thing about it, is nobody else puts up with this, much less supports it to this degree when you haven't had the level of success that we're accustomed to. It's when this thing gets going, it's going to be crazy. Like I fully believe that.
I completely agree with you, Robbie, because like you said, I was around watching what was in the 90s, and I'm from Arizona originally. I think we talked about that on the phone. And I met my wife out there in 1988. I was already a Nebraska fan at that point after the 84 Orange Bowl when Osborne went for 2. It was like, that takes a lot of stones. I was a fan for life.
Yeah,
plus,
absolutely.
They talked a lot about the fact that he was a very deeply religious man, very sold out to his Christian faith, and he was very big on developing young men as opposed to just good players. And I identified with that as a 16-year-old. And so I became a fan. And when I met her, she dragged my butt up here in 1990. I got to my first game was the final Big 8 game ever, Nebraska, Oklahoma in 95.
There you go.
I paid $50 for a ticket up in North Stadium, and that was double face value. If you want to know how easy it was, how inexpensive it was to go to games back in the mid 90s.
Yeah.
$25 for a North Stadium seat, you can't find that now.
No.
So, but yeah, when this thing gets going, I wonder though, here's the weird question. Are podcasts being consumed for Nebraska specifically because people enjoy lamenting repeatedly throughout a week over the pain they've experienced, and that once things actually get good, do you think there's still going to be that market, or do you think you could see something like that dropping off?
So I totally understand the question, but if you've ever seen like a Georgia football or Alabama football message board, people will always find something to be miserable about.
This is true.
No matter how many games you win, they will always find something miserable about, whether it's their 10th 5-star didn't commit, or, they didn't like the call on 3rd down, so they only won by 35 instead of 42. Like people will always find something to be upset about, and there's always something to talk about, right? I do think that Nebraska's been wandering through the desert for so long that there's going to be a level of like joy and appreciation to it that that I don't think exists a lot of other places. And I think there's just almost like a gratefulness that we finally got back the thing that we have wanted so desperately, and realized that wasn't guaranteed to us, right? When you finally get the thing that you realize is you're not entitled to it, like that's a different level of appreciation than, I don't know that Alabama suffered long enough to know or to feel like, like, oh, we're not entitled to to this thing, right? Because they went through a little bit, but it wasn't that bad. And I think Nebraska, and plus Nebraskans are better than people from Alabama anyway. I fully believe that. But and don't get me started.
I'll agree with you. I've driven through there as a truck driver.
And don't get me started on people from College Station, Texas. But
especially one. Yeah.
One in particular.
He's not even from there, the jerk.
But it's I think there will always be a place for kind of the commentary about Nebraska football. And honestly, I think Nebraska is probably one of the few places where, it's actually going to get better as Nebraska gets better. There used to be this kind of narrative of, the media loves it when Nebraska is terrible. And I was like, I promise you we don't.
No.
Like, it's so much more fun when Nebraska's good.
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather be nitpicking about little things than, hey, are they ever going to make a bowl game again? Like, that's not a fun thing to figure out. It's way more fun to go through the exercise of, okay, what do they got to do to get into the top 12 or, whatever it is at the time. And I firmly believe it's just going to get better and better.
Oh, yeah. And I'd say from a marketing standpoint, there is always a desire for the underdog in any media conglomerate of any sort. When TCU went to the national championship against Georgia, of course, everybody assumed Georgia was going to win, but there was always the spin of, but what if? What if the little guy manages to pull it off? Now, Nebraska is not a little guy. They are a blue blood, tried and true. We have been the little guy for or at least, I mean, if it's a decade plus, that seems like forever.
Yeah.
And if you talk to any kid of this generation across the country and you ask them, what do you think about Nebraska? They're going to scoff and be like, Nebraska? What's that? Like, I don't even know where that's out on a map, let alone what is their football team doing. But as soon as Nebraska gets a taste of some success again, I mean, you've got media individuals that are just going to love it to no end. Like Kirk Herbstreit is going to love it.
Joel
Klatt's going to
even
love
though he
it.
kicked his tail for a couple of years there.
Urban Meyer's going to love it. There's just, you just go down the list, and Nebraska is just going to get endless amounts of love. And obviously there's going to be scrutiny, and there's going to be doubt, and there's going to be controversy that will always seep up from any program that's starting to claw its way to the top again. But I agree with you. I think that as soon as Nebraska starts to substantiate real success, and it doesn't necessarily have to come in the form of going to a college football playoff necessarily, at least not right away. As soon as that happens, I mean, it's going to be endlessly. This is just my opinion. I think it's going to be on every media source. Period. They're just going to be talking about Nebraska. Is Nebraska back? Have they made it back? And so from a business aspect of things, that's just money. That's just free money just rolling in, because there's so many clicks. There's so many people. I would not be surprised if there's other fan bases. There's kids that listen to their Joe Rogan podcast, or they listen to their Lex Friedman podcast, but they, maybe they're a Florida fan, maybe they're a Miami fan or something like that. And then they see Nebraska's doing some things. They're like, oh, let's see what podcasts there are with Nebraska. And then, boy, are they going to be surprised when they look up Nebraska podcasts and there's like 185.
Yeah.
It's like, where do I even start?
I didn't even know really what a podcast was till like 2017.
Yeah. I
wasn't driving at the time. I was working at Hornady Manufacturing in Grand Island making bullets. It's the coolest job ever, if you ask me. I ran out of music to listen to, ran out of, audiobooks to listen to, because I could use Bluetooth headphones for hearing protection. So I was scrolling around on Facebook and I saw this Second Amendment podcast popped up that branded itself the Howard Stern of Second Amendment podcast. I was like, well, now you've got me interested. And it was the Howard Stern. The next thing I know, I'm like, wonder if there's a Husker podcast out there. Dumbest question I've ever asked myself, because as soon as I searched, it was like media ones alone were like 10 of them. And then you had at least 15, 20 fan-based ones. Go Big Red Gas was one of the first ones that popped up for me. I think NBNR started about the time we did, maybe just a little bit before.
Yeah.
And they just kind of took off like a rocket. Meanwhile, I've got a great studio. If you build it, it will stream, as they say. Why don't we?
I was going to ask him. I was going to ask him a quick question. We've got quite a few viewers right now on Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and whatnot.
Twitter, yeah.
For those who are watching, if you could summarize to them exactly what the Hurrdat Sports Network is and what it is about Hurrdat Sports that got you involved with them, just let the listeners know.
Yeah, so Hurrdat Sports is basically, we call it a new wave media company. Basically, it's not reliant on traditional media. It's a very heavily social media presence, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. You look at their followers on any of those, and that's the primary place where we put our content. Yes, we have a website. That's more of just a info page mostly, except for the NEB prep stuff that we do. We get the coaches polls out there and all that kind of stuff. So you'll get real writing and info on the page still, but a lot of the content outside of the writing is all on social media. We don't, we're not a TV station. We're not a radio station, even though I'm on the radio. For Hurrdat, that's a digital product. We just have a partnership with AM 590 and ESPN Tri-Cities, and then KFOR and Lincoln for one of the hours on the show.
Cool.
But it's a digital media company that wants to tell sports stories that matter in a unique way. And that's really the goal. The reason I got involved is because of the people involved. I met, it's funny. I knew Damon was going over there, and I knew him from the old radio station days, and had always wanted to work with him more. And so I knew he was going over there. But honestly, and then I knew Jacob Padilla. He was with Hale Varsity, and then Hurrdat bought Hale Varsity, and Jacob and I have been friends for a long time. But that's about all I knew of actual people over there. And then I always joke, it's true though, I slid into Chris Gorman's DMs. He started following me on Twitter for some reason. Probably because of Damon. But he started following me on Twitter, and I was like, well, this guy followed me. I want to slide in his DMs and see what's up. Because I was looking for something more in terms of being on air all the time. And so I was like, hey, I like what you guys are doing over there. Like, if you've got, an opportunity for me, I'd love to talk to you about it. And probably 4 months after that, I had signed a podcast deal with them. And then about 4 months after that, I took over the radio show. So I got involved because of the people. I love Chris Gorman. I love Sasha. I love DB. I love Bill. Like everybody that I've met over there has been, you can just tell that they're doing this because they care about what's happening. They care about other people. They care about telling stories that matter. And that's the kind of stuff I want to be involved with. And so it was a pretty easy choice for me to get involved there and to kind of give up a day job that I'd been doing well at to kind of go full in, right? I'd been sort of half in, half out with doing the radio show and then still doing my other day job. And, at a certain point I was like, you know what, I'm going to take a bet here on myself and on the rest of Hurrdat Sports that, this is going to be a not only lucrative opportunity for me financially, but just a thing that's going to be super fulfilling for me personally. And it's the first time in my life I've not had any part of my work be a job that I don't care about. Right. I've always worked jobs to make the bill, like make ends meet and pay the bills and, kind of furnish whatever kind of lifestyle I wanted. But there was always a part of that job or a part of what I was doing across multiple jobs. I was like, I don't care about this at all. Or I actively disliked it. This is the first time in my life where it's like, yeah, I like everything I do. And that's a super cool thing, and
that's a very cool thing.
And it gives you a ton of life and a ton of energy. It's not like I'm working any less than I used to, but I am way less exhausted. And that's pretty cool.
That's awesome, man.
Absolutely. Question for you.
Yeah.
What are your big storylines that you're seeing out of spring camp? What's grabbed your attention?
Yeah. I mean, obviously you got the quarterback stuff, right? That's the That's the $1 million question that everybody's paying attention to. And I think out of that, the biggest thing for me is I think Danny Kaelin might be a lot better than I thought he was.
Yeah.
Which is great for Nebraska, because then you don't have this Dylan or bust mentality, because that's a dangerous place to be in.
Yeah.
You've got a true freshman quarterback, and I get having a second true freshman quarterback's not that much more security, right? But at least you've got an option, right? You're coaching yourself into options.
Right.
One of the things that Rule said, and I'm obsessed with Rule's press conferences. I dissect those things like crazy. I love them, because he always gives you a ton of information, and a lot of it's not just like, a lot of it's kind of philosophical stuff, which I really appreciate.
Me too. Yep.
One of the things he said, this was probably a couple weeks ago now, he goes, I'm not looking for a starter. He goes, I'm trying to make everyone good enough to be a starter, right? Like, that's a huge philosophical difference than anything I've ever heard. And I coached college basketball for 9 years, and I never thought about it that way. There were guys I was like, that guy's never going to play, whatever. He's a roster filler. Like, I was never trying to make that guy good enough to be a starter, because I just knew. But, and maybe he's not trying to get the walk. Maybe he knows deep down that the walk-ons are never going to start games for him, or if they do, you're in a world of trouble, right?
Right.
But just to have this mindset of, I'm not going out and looking for a starter. I'm trying to make everybody on this team good enough to be a starter. Otherwise, they wouldn't be here, right? And have it be something where I think he would be okay if Heinrich Haarberg was the starter, or if Danny Kaelin was the starter. I genuinely don't think he cares if Dylan Raiola starts the first game. I think everybody else cares a lot, right? I certainly do, but
no doubt about it.
Yeah, I think the fan base might lose their minds a little bit if Dylan Raiola doesn't take that first snap against UTEP. But I think the coolest thing about it is Nebraska's kind of coached and recruited themselves into options, right? Last year felt like, well, there's 3 guys in the room. I'm not sure we like any of them taking snaps at quarterback, right? This year, even though one of those is the same guy in Heinrich Haarberg, I think you look at it and you go, okay, well, they brought in Glenn Thomas, who's, this guy that's really good track record as a quarterback coach, and he's worked with some guys in the NFL that you really like. He's worked with Rule at the college level and developed guys that have been really successful. And I think you just kind of look at it and say, okay, if Dylan Raiola is not ready or isn't quite to the place where they want him to be, it seems like they're comfortable and have coached themselves into options at the quarterback spot, which I don't think is something I anticipated coming into the spring. So that's a big one for me. And then the other one is just the lack of movement in terms of guys moving on, right? Transfer portal opened a few days ago and nobody's left. Not a soul. And I get there in the middle of spring practice, right? So maybe you'll get a little bit of movement. Even Rule said he anticipates there'll be a little bit of movement by the end of spring practice, but I'd be shocked if there's anybody that would have played this year that ends up leaving, which is crazy to think about in this day and age of college football. Like, everybody loses guys. Everybody. Since Rule started, I think they've lost 8 guys to the portal total.
That's wild.
Colorado lost 8 guys in a day. They've lost 14 since it's opened back up, right?
Right.
They lose half of a team every time the portal opens up. Nebraska, I think the number is 8 guys since he got here. That's going through a coaching change. That's going through a tough season. That's going through a new recruiting class. That's going through way too many guys on the roster right now, and nobody wants to leave. Like, to me, that's the headline, is nobody wants to leave Nebraska.
Why?
Yeah. Why?
Why?
Like, he's obvious. There's something going on there, obviously, that everybody wants to be a part of. And he kind of went into it yesterday after the scrimmage, where he goes, where else would you want to be? Like, he goes through the laundry list, right, of facilities and fan base and history and culture and coaches that can get you to the next level. He goes and strength and conditioning and nutrition. He goes through everything, right? He goes, we're the best in the country in all those. Where else would you want to be? Where else are you going to go? It's like, hey, you can go somewhere else and play in front of 25,000 people. That's fine. We're going to go play in front of 90.
Yep. Yeah.
Just imagine if we're winning.
The philosophy change from Bill Callahan till now is remarkable to me, because in Bill Callahan's case, it was the number ones practiced. Everybody else sat and watched. And if you needed one of those guys, holy crap, It was a 2 or 3 week process to get them up to game speed.
It was
right?
a very NFL style.
It was obvious. Yeah. And then you had Pelini came in, who was us against the world. After you got to about 2010 or so, he kind of had a little bit of an animosity.
You know what's funny about Pelini? He was so close to getting it right.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
He was
far away.
So close to getting it right, because I think he did develop a like love and respect amongst the players, but he didn't appreciate what the place was.
Yep.
Right. Like that's the big difference between Pelini and Rule. I know they come off way differently. I don't actually think they're that different. I think Rule has this, I don't know if maturity is the right word, but he's got a perspective that Pelini didn't have. Pelini got way too like into the weeds and couldn't see the forest for the trees. He got
into his feels too much.
100%. Yes. And I think he was way more sensitive about a lot of those things. And I know you don't probably look at a guy like Pelini and think he's sensitive, but when you have outbursts like that, it's because you're sensitive.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like you're covering kind of up for some insecurities or whatever. And Rule, he probably has insecurities, but I haven't found them yet. Like that's one of the most convicted, like secure people I've ever seen in my life, and not just in football. Like he believes 100% in what he's doing, and I think it's really hard to be 100% convicted in what you're doing and still be open to learning new things. Like that's a really delicate balance, and the fact that he seems to be able to strike that is really impressive to me. But you're right. The philosophy change. I mean, I don't even know what you want to say about Riley's philosophy. I don't even know what that like. Just help
Pac-12.
Yeah, like and
sunshine, lollipops,
and I think
sprinkles on the ice cream.
I think Riley gets a little bit of a bad rap because he did have. He is the last guy to take Nebraska to a bowl game, so that's something. Yep. And he got off to a great start that one his second year in the program. It was 2016, I think, and. Yep. He did have some recruiting wins that didn't end up going to fruition because he obviously got fired, and so those guys weren't going to stick around. But I think there's places where that would have been a better fit in terms of what Riley did, and then Frost is just a disaster. I mean, on all fronts, there's really nothing. There's really no redeeming qualities about that.
No, not at all. So, if you had any expectations going into the spring game next Saturday, what would those be? I know for me, the first one would be turnovers, because we had 82 in the first quarter and a half last year.
Yeah, I think just cleaner football in general. That's turnovers, that's execution. The defense obviously got to that point last year where they were playing pretty clean football on a pretty consistent basis. But Nebraska's offense, just I think it got better, but the procedural penalties at the start of the year, obviously the turnovers never got better. And I think just being able to execute at a basic level offensively, right? Like there was no point last year where I thought to myself, yeah, they can probably complete 3 consecutive passes, right? And that's probably something you need to be able to do to win in college football in today's day and age, right?
Yep.
It doesn't even have to be this high-flying offense. It's just, hey, it's a 2-minute drill. Let's complete 3 passes in a row, see if we can get into field goal range. That's not a big ask, right? Like that's a pretty basic thing to expect out of a Big Ten offense. I would expect to be able to see that and just have a lot cleaner football, whether that's turnovers, penalties, whatever the case. Just stop beating yourself and be able to take advantage of what the defense is giving you, right? DB and I talked about this week. As a defense, you're always giving them something, right? However you set it up. You're not taking away everything. That's not possible, right? That's just not a realistic possibility. And if you try and take away everything, you're going to give up everything, right? You're going to get burned in a huge, huge way. So whether it's, hey, we're going to allow this type of play, we're going to allow this area of the field, like you understand what you're giving up and you just try and make it difficult for the offense to be able to exploit that. The offense needs to be able to exploit that. Right. If the Nebraska offense can start exploiting the areas where the defense is willing to give them stuff, that'll be a huge step in the right direction for me. I'm not asking them to look like Washington last year. Like I'm just asking them to look like a middle of the pack major conference football offense. And that to me gets them pretty close to where they want to go.
So that the thing that we've heard during the off season and coming into spring camp is this whole video series, The Chasing 3, which is some of the
I love it.
Incredible
Yeah.
content. Jay Slit or whatever his name was.
Jay Slit, yeah.
He's the guy that he did a thing with us.
Oh yeah.
2021 it was. He was looking for fans that wanted to just talk about what it was like being a Husker fan. So he came and he filmed us.
Mhm.
And that was kind of cool. And it just his eye for coming up with how to put story to film is just, and Kyle's the same way at NBNR. That dude has just got a gift. What I like about the Chasing 3 though is at first I watched it, I'm like, well, we lost by 3 points in 5 games last year. Shouldn't we be chasing 4? And then I realized, no, there's a little more to it. We're chasing 3 on offense. We're also chasing 3 less on defense. We're not wanting to give up 18 points a game or whatever it was we gave up last year. We want to give up 14 or 15 so that we can score 21 or 24 instead. And I'm like, I like that. I like the idea that it's just, we're this close. We need to go absolutely pursue it with all. And then from there, you go into, okay, now we're chasing 10, we're chasing 14, we're chasing something that grabs people's attention. I expect we'll see Dylan. I think we're going to see a whole lot of Heinrich on Saturday. I really do.
Yeah.
Heinrich and the walk-on, what's his name, Woshi?
Jack Wochi.
Jack Wochi. I think you'll see a lot of those guys in the second half, and you'll probably see Dylan and Danny kind of splitting reps in the first and second quarter just to kind of preserve them because they know what they got with them. And I think you're right. I think DB even said it about Kalen that he's better than we expected, that he's throwing some dimes to people, and he's developing a rapport with some receivers that maybe a lot of people didn't expect. But that's also part of, I like Rule's philosophy too, that number one, he wants to develop the ability for all these guys to start, like you said before. But I also think I like about him is that he's given these guys the reps to do that. He's given them the chance, given them their shot, and everybody's on the same playing field. And he's not going to overhype one guy unless there's a reason. If he's mentioning somebody in a press conference, there is a freaking reason.
Well, and that's
it's pretty clear.
That's the cool thing about the way they set up their practices, right? With the different stations that they do, it allows you to get real first team type reps with your first, second, third string guys. And you're not limited to, hey, just the first string guys and maybe some of the second string guys are going to get good reps. You're getting good reps pretty far down your depth chart. I think there's some places you're probably getting into the fourth and fifth string that are getting really good reps, especially on places like defensive backs where you've got 30 defensive backs right now.
Right.
I think they actually have 30 defensive backs. You've got I think you've got like 21 defensive linemen, and a ton of those guys are getting reps. Offensive linemen, they've got, I think, 12-ish, 14 maybe offensive linemen they feel pretty good about that they're getting reps with those guys, which I don't know if you remember last year, they weren't sure if they could play a real game because they didn't know if they had enough offensive linemen.
And everybody was switching sides in the gray shirts.
Yeah. And that's not the case this year. I think they've got basically 3 full line changes worth of O linemen that they can go out and feel pretty good about. Now, if they want to use all those guys in the spring game, because some of them are older, I don't know, right? Like you talked about on the defensive side, how Nash and Ty probably won't get a ton of run because they're older. They don't need it. You just don't want to worry about it. Nash is coming off of the wrestling season. So there's some of those guys that probably aren't going to get a ton of run. But the fact that during practice, you're getting everybody that's even ever going to dream about playing is getting real reps to get better is a great thing for Nebraska. And it's especially now where they're at a place where nobody on this roster has set themselves so far apart that they're head and shoulders above everybody else, right? I mean, you've got guys that you really like. There's guys I really like, but there's nobody on this team that's like, oh, that guy's a guaranteed first rounder, or that guy's a guaranteed All-American, or even that guy's guaranteed All-Conference, right? So the top and the bottom are a lot closer than they are some other places, right?
Does that worry you?
No, not right now, because I think that allows you to really get the best out of everyone, right? If 2 years from now we're looking at it, and I still don't know that the top and the bottom are going to be terribly far apart, because I think the bottom's going to continue to rise up with the top. But if 2 years from now we don't have anybody that we're like, hey, yeah, that's definitely an all-conference type guy, yeah, I'll be worried about that. But I'll also be really surprised if that's the case, because I think you're going to have some guys that make some all-conference team this year, whether it's on the defensive or I think potentially offensive line. You're going to have guys. I think in the defensive secondary, you're going to have guys that are potentially all conference type players. But outside of that, I really think you're going to be just continuing to raise the level. But I don't know that with Coach Rule, you're ever going to have the bottom and the top of the roster be too far apart. I think the level of competition that he promotes lends itself to having there not be a ton of differentiation between a 1 and a 4. And that's great for your roster. I mean, that's not, especially at places where, running backs, you saw the attrition we had at running back last year, wide receiver. You saw the attrition at wide receiver last year. Offensive line, they lost 3 starters on the offensive line last year, but they played better by the end of the year than they were at the beginning of the year, and certainly better than they did the previous year, right? So that's what it lends itself to, is when you have that level of competition, is you give yourself an opportunity that, he's talked about it. He's like, hey, guys are going to get banged up. We're not going to shy away from that. Like, that's the game. It's a physical sport. Like, we're not trying to get guys hurt. We do everything we can to keep guys from getting hurt, but at the end of the day, you have to play football to get better at football, and some guys are going to get hurt, and we got to live with that. That lends itself to being ready to put in guys at whatever position, no matter where they started on the depth chart. And I think that's going to be a staple of his program moving forward.
It's reminiscent, very reminiscent of what we saw in the 90s, because there wasn't a whole lot of difference between the top of that roster and the bottom of that roster. Anybody could step in and play at an all-conference, or at least most, like our running back room. Yeah. One time you had Lawrence Phillips, Mon Green, Clinton Childs, Damon Benning, all in the same room, all who could have started for any Power 5 team in the country.
Absolutely.
And there wasn't a whole lot of difference. And it probably would have been all conference wherever they played.
Yep.
Absolutely. So there was no difference between really the top and the bottom. So I think that's where we're going. I think you're right. The difference is the level of athlete that we have now versus the level of athlete that I think we're going to start attracting when we start getting those 8-4, 9-3, God forbid, 10-2 seasons where we're blowing people out. We're supposed to blow out. Yeah. And we're kicking the daylights out of some Big Ten teams here and there. So did you have anything else you wanted to talk about with the spring game, Scott, or ready to move on to the next topic? Is there anything on your mind?
No. Right. I'm just ready for the spring game. I'd say my expectations are that we're not going to see a lot of razzle dazzle. I think we're just going to see a lot of fundamental football. And what I hope to see from that is fundamental football. Because that's what we were trying to get. That was the secret sauce we were trying to formulate last year, and it just didn't come to fruition. So that's what I hope to see.
And I really don't think, I mean, you mentioned you think that maybe, Dylan and DK are going to split reps, and I don't know how much we're going to see of either of those guys. I don't think he's going to give the public much to go on there. I really don't. And it wouldn't surprise me if he threw a lot of hard work out there, or, because I kind of talk about this sometimes, where I think he's sort of playing 4-dimensional chess while the rest of us are just out here playing checkers. Where, he allowed this, he allowed an extended media session for one of the practices a couple weeks ago. And that's the one where we saw live 11-on-11 with some of the quarterbacks throwing. And there's a part of me that was like, I think he knew that DK was going to look really good and let people see it just so they'd kind of ease off on the Raiola stuff a little bit. It wouldn't surprise me if he thinks that either Kalen's going to look really good or Harburg's going to look really good, that he lets those guys get some extended run just to ease up off the Raiola stuff a little bit. I don't think it's because he doesn't think Raiola is good. I think he just wants to make sure that people aren't putting all their eggs in that basket, so that if for whatever reason one of the other guys does win that job, we're not losing our minds in the fall. Maybe I'm overthinking it, but I really think he does think about things at that level. Now, whether or not that's actually what he believes or not, I don't know. But I do think what we see in the spring game will be a direct reflection of a message he's trying to send, either to the players or to the fans or to the rest of the country.
To everybody.
And whatever that message is, that will dictate what we see in the spring game way more than probably what we're going to see in the fall.
I'm hoping what we get to see in the spring game is a whole lot of running the football. That'd be really nice. I'd like to see a lot of Dowdell, because he hasn't had a whole lot of reps at Oregon. It'd be nice to see him get a lot of reps in the spring game. I'd love to see I don't think Irvin's going to play, but what Emmett looks like. I've seen an awful lot of highlights on these quick videos they're putting out on Twitter that there he is busting a tackle and running down the sidelines and outrunning people. So very reminiscent of a guy who wore number 8 a few years ago. Kind of reminds me, he's got a little bit of that jitterbug in him.
That would be so. I think people would take that for sure.
Yes, we would. I think we would too, for sure. For sure. So, next question, next topic, real quick. Key position group. What is the group that you think needs to make the biggest jump this year, Ravi? I've got mine for sure.
Yeah, so I'm going to take quarterbacks out of it because that's the obvious one.
That's the one I'm going to take out too. Yeah, I'm not even going there.
Like, that's obvious. If that doesn't make a jump from abysmal to functional, then not a lot else matters. Right. I don't think they have to be superstars at the quarterback spot this year to get to 8 or 9 wins. I really don't. I think the rest of the roster can be good enough that as long as you're not actively working against Nebraska on offense, then that can be good enough. Just being functional, being average at the quarterback spot is a huge improvement. So I'm going to take that out of the equation. It'd be really easy to say wide receivers, but that kind of goes too much with the quarterback spot, in my opinion. Which that takes the easy answers off of the board. I really liked the defensive line last year. I liked them in the spring. I thought they were going to be good last year. And I still think they're going to be good. I think that's an area that they're going to get better. But I'm going to go with the offensive line because even though I thought they were much improved last year, I thought they did a really good job. I think they're going to be even better this year. I'd like to see them go from being, surprisingly good to actually just good, right? To go from being, way better than we expected to being able to kind of insert and dominate, like insert their will, enforce their will on opponents and dominate and wear them down and get to the point where, maybe the running backs are good, maybe they're not, but there's always a hole there and they're going to get 4 yards regardless, right? Like that's the type of offensive line that takes you to the next level because then it doesn't really matter who's back there. It's like, maybe Emmett Johnson's going to get 8 yards out of that hole and Gabe Irvin's only going to get 6, but either way, you got a good chunk there, right?
Especially on first down.
That's the place where I think not only needs the most improvement, but I think the most improvement's likely, right? I have a lot of confidence in Coach Raiola. I have a lot of confidence in the players that they've brought in that group, and the guys that they have that haven't played yet. There's a group of redshirt freshmen, starting with Sam Sledge, that the coaching staff loves. Everybody that I talk to that knows anything about high school football in Nebraska is obsessed with Sam Sledge.
It's got a sweet name too.
Yeah, it's a great offensive line name. Sledge. Like incredible, right?
Perfect name for a starting center for the next 3 years. Yeah.
Like that's you've got him, you've got Gunnar Gatula, you've got, Henry Letofsky hasn't played a lot yet, but people think really highly of him. Justin Evans is a guy that people love. There's a bunch of dudes on that offensive line that haven't even really gotten to play very much yet that I think are really, really good. And that doesn't even include Bryce Benhart, who came back and had a really good year last year. Ben Scott, who had a really good year last year and is coming back. Teddy Prohaska, who looks like a new person with the strength and conditioning and nutrition program. Like, I think this offensive line could take a leap to go from, they're pretty good, they're better than I expected, to they can dominate an opponent and kind of steal their will. And that's a game changer for Nebraska if they can get back to that.
Get back to that 2010, 2011 offensive line that can move people when you needed to in the third and fourth quarter to wear people down.
Yeah, just wear them out and be able to be in a spot late in games where you can be running the same stuff and they can't stop it anymore. That's the place you want to be, and I think they can get there with this offensive line.
Do you have a position group, Scott, that you're looking at?
Well, I would have just said offensive line, but
me too.
You basically
you
said
stole it, Ravi.
But a position group that
you got to go first. Yeah. That's a rookie move, guys. You got to go first.
A position group that I think will pay dividends as the season goes along is, what does our defensive back group look like? We've got Tommy Hill, who is projected to be one of the top defensive backs in the country this year, which is
is
really good. But can we in the Big Ten have a substantial jump in our defensive back room to where it puts all of the dimensional game planning for our defense to really lock it down entirely? Because if you've got defensive back room locked down, we really have a very, very solid defense. And in the Big Ten, if you're forced to run and you are damned if you don't, and you've got a defensive back room that's out there ball hawking and taking away balls, like I really think that our defensive back room is going to be key to our defense really, really locking down the offenses that we play against, specifically in the Big Ten. Because the Big Ten, it's been kind of molding and changing especially in the last few years. It's not been as run heavy across the board as it has been, especially with Wisconsin fundamentally changing their football program, and Iowa.
Look who's coming into the league this year, right?
Yep.
I mean, USC, they're going to throw the ball over the yard.
Exactly.
I have no idea what UCLA is going to do. I mean, they've been through a lot of change. I have no idea what they're going to do. But Ohio State's on the schedule now. Obviously, Wisconsin as the air raid guy, Phil Longo, and they still run the ball, and he has run the ball a lot historically. But fundamentally, like you said, change what they do on offense. That's a 30-year schedule right there.
Yep.
I mean, those 4 teams are a 30-year schedule. That is a totally different dynamic than what people used to think about with Big Ten offenses.
It's changed.
Yeah.
And so I think having a defensive back room that, I mean, of course, every defensive fanatic would say, you know what I'd really like out of my defense this year? Turnovers. I think that if we were to see a jump, or God, wouldn't it be great if we went positive in the turnover margin?
If we can go neutral, I think you're in good shape.
Yeah.
You're going to get to 0. Neutral. Oh, you're bowling at neutral.
I think at neutral, you're at 8 wins. Honest to God, I think you're at 8 wins at neutral.
I would not be surprised if we see our defensive back group just going ham sandwich with a slice of cheese. I would not be surprised. Do I expect it? No. I think that we've got a lot of work to do in our defensive back room. We've got a lot of unproven talent, but we've got a lot of talent. Like you said, we got a lot of guys in that room, and we've just got good coaches across the board. But I think a really big key this year is going to be, what are we going to get picked apart in the secondary? Is that something that we need to be concerned about? Is that something you are concerned about?
Not about being picked apart, right? Obviously, there's going to be teams that are more successful against you than others, but the guys that I would look for, they think the world of Bly Hill at that other corner. The other guy that I would look out for is Jeremiah Charles. He was one of the track guys that they recruited out of Texas. I think originally they maybe played around with him at wide receiver. He moved over to defensive back last year, and honestly, he could push Bly Hill for a starting job.
Yep.
And he is as freaky as they get athletically. Not that Bly Hill's not. Bly Hill's like a 6'3", got crazy long arms, like length and athleticism coming out of his ears. Like those two guys at that other spot, and we already know that Tommy Hill has turned into, possibly, I mentioned guys maybe being all conference this year. Yeah. Like Tommy Hill's a guy that could be all conference this year. But at that other spot between Bly Hill and Jeremiah Charles especially, I think you're looking at an opportunity to have 3 really good corners. And then I feel great about the safeties. I think, Deshaun Singleton coming back, Malcolm Hartzog, obviously you're going to have Gifford back there as well. You're going to have really, as kind of that nickel, I don't know, whatever they call him, that weird fifth.
He's like the peso from the Pelini offense, was it kind of the nickel.
Was Eric Haig kind of spot?
Eric Haig, Jajon Gomes, I think, played a little bit of that.
Playing that peso spot. It's the same type of role where you're a little more downhill, you're a little closer to line of scrimmage, but you're still technically a defensive back.
Still cover.
Sort of a linebacker, defensive back hybrid. I feel really good about the safeties. I've got very few questions there. But I think that defensive back group could be really, really good. The other thing is, if that defensive line is what I think it is, it makes the defensive backs group life a lot easier. If you're getting pressure, if you're getting sacks, if you're causing fumbles and mayhem and whatever, it's pretty easy to be a defensive back in that scenario.
if you're not having to cover for more than 3 to 5 seconds, you're doing pretty good.
Yeah.
You like I said earlier, you kind of took my thunder by saying offensive line, but I always give the guest the first shot. So my number 2 was easy. My number 2 was, who is the guy that's behind Isaac Gifford?
Yeah.
That's a very key, because what if he gets dinged?
Mm-hmm.
Who's that guy that's in that number 2 slot? I don't even know who might be practicing at those spots.
Yeah, I had a name and I can't remember who it was. I'd have to look
Is
up.
it Deshaun Singleton? Does he
No,
fit that bill?
I don't think so. I'm gonna look at the roster real quick because I think it'll come to me. But I hope it'll come to me. But there's, and I don't think he's gonna play. I think he's mostly special teams this year, but I'm not just saying that because he's my co-host son here.
Caleb.
I think Caleb is going to be really good at that spot. I don't know if you guys watch him play in high school at all. That dude loves to hit people, and he comes down with some bad intentions.
Love it.
And so I don't know if that's this year to me. And he's a kick returner, so he's got a few screws loose down there. Those punt returners are a little nuts
For sure.
That's one of those like father like son situations there. But I think within a couple years, probably next year more, and who knows, maybe he surprises me and is ready sooner than I think. But I think he's going to put a little weight on and end up being really good at kind of that Isaac Gifford spot, because he's got the mentality for it, for sure. Kind of almost like a Bob Sanders type.
Yeah.
From back in the day, like maybe a little shorter than you'd like out of a safety, but man, like incredible coverage skills and has some bad intentions when he comes down to the box.
Yeah, you don't want to be a tight end going across the middle or a running back coming out of the backfield against a guy like Bob Sanders, Isaac Gifford, or whoever comes up behind him. So yeah, that's the key position for me, is whoever's playing that if Isaac's not there. And by the way, folks, in case you're wondering, this is not a bag of something that you might think it is.
It kind of looks like shrooms.
It's my son made homemade beef jerky, and it is fantastic.
It is really good.
We were chomping on a little bit here before we went live, and also what we did before we went live, Robbie, is we talked a little bit about the good grief, my brain just froze. The AD who shall not be named. Trev. So we're not going to talk about him, and but what I did want to do is, because you were pretty salty about it. One of the things I appreciated about it, much like Coach Frost. I loved watching him play. It was really hard to watch him coach. It's kind of the way I feel about Trev now. It's kind of like, hey, you make a lateral move. I mean, at least go take a conference commissioner job, even at a smaller conference. If
I think sub-lateral move, if I'm going to be honest.
Sub-lateral,
that's
because I don't think A&M is necessarily a great fit in the SEC anyway, and they're probably going to be on their way back somewhere closer to the Big 12 when it came to it. But what I do like is the guy we have. I got a little video here I wanted to show you real quick about some of the things I love about.
I'll give you a little bit of background on my athletic career. I was the backup kicker. I was also the backup holder. When it came time for a pinch runner in the last inning of the game and everybody else had played, that was my time. I was a 15th kid on a 13-man basketball roster, and if there had been a javelin catching position, that's where they would have put me.
You catch one of those with your head, you're getting coloring books for Christmas for the rest of your life.
Just thought I'd have to show off my Phil Morris skills there for a minute. And I've got that Blue Collar Comedy 1. The very first one is so underrated as a comedy show, which is one of the beauties of working out at Hillcrest Country Club, is I've gotten to meet Larry.
Oh, nice.
Guy. So he's one of the coolest people on the planet.
He was out at the Jet Awards the other day, a couple weeks ago when I was out there.
So that was super dude. Cool. Such an absolutely good dude. So that was that. We'll leave Trev alone because we like Troy. So
no, I mean I think it's not to do a revisionist history thing or anything here, but I think Nebraska may have ended up getting the better end of that deal. I really do. Too. DB wouldn't really let me get away with it, but you can make an argument that Nebraska kind of helped Trev out of a tough situation that he was in at UNO.
Yeah.
Obviously people were not thrilled about him getting rid of the wrestling program, especially. I think people understood the football program. I really do. The wrestling program was a tough sell. I've looked into the numbers of it. It doesn't cost that much to operate a Division I wrestling program, even at a high level. It's not a huge line item there. And then obviously you've got the Nebraska Flatwater story about financial issues at the University of Nebraska Omaha athletic department under Trev's guidance, or maybe lack thereof, when you're kind of looking at what happened there and there's millions of dollars that's unaccounted for. Like that's a tough pill to swallow. And yeah, like he brought us Matt Rule. Like, can't take that away. Right. You can also say though that what else did he, and I get that that's generally the most important job that an athletic director has. Hire the football coach, get it right. Okay. Looks like he did. I also know for almost a certainty that he was ready to move on after the initial discussions didn't work out, and that we were a lot closer than we probably want to think about to ending up with a Jeff Monken type hire at Nebraska instead of a Matt Rule.
Wow. Yeah.
Like, I think that was a closer reality than any Nebraska fan really knows, because the money wasn't working out between Carolina and Nebraska and Matt Rule, because that originally, I think he came into town like end of October. It was a full month.
Illinois game. Yeah. He was meandering around town during the Illinois game.
It was a full month before that actually got done. And it was dead on the vine shortly after he came into town, because they couldn't figure out the details. And so Trev had started to move on in his search before some of the big money donors came in and says, like, nope, let's get this thing across the finish line. We're not dealing with and I love Lance Leipold, but like, we're not dealing with a Lance Leipold or a Chris Kleinman or a Jeff Monken type hire. Like, go get Matt Rule. Here's the money. Go get it done. So, like, yes, he did identify Rule as an ideal candidate. He was also ready to move on if he had to, which, I don't know what that looks like unless the big money donors come in and say, hey, no, go get the guy. We will pay. I don't know what that looks like. There's a lot of things that he wanted to get done that he didn't stay long enough to know if they ever would have got done or not. So I have no idea. I know the practice facility wasn't his deal. He saw it across the finish line, but like, that was started with Moose. That was a lot of the fundraising was done before he got there. So, he was here for 2.5 years, and he hired a football coach, and he did a great job at that, but not really sure what else he brought to the table.
Restructuring Fred, what else can you say?
Well, and technically that happened under, he restructured Fred, and then Fred got the extension under Dennis. I forget his last name, but the interim AD. Right. So he also restructured Frost, then fired him before any of the restructuring took place. So they still owed him all the money, right? So you can make an argument maybe that wasn't the best move either. But I think between hiring Rule, his next best move was probably not firing Fred. So, I think you can make an argument that Nebraska got the better end of the deal with Troy Dannon.
For sure. I already played the video, so you missed it.
That's okay.
Well, let's move on to, let's close the book on spring. I know one thing I'm going to not be watching in the spring game. That's going to be the spring game itself. Unfortunately, my wife and I have been wanting to go to Family Life Today's Weekend to Remember marriage conference for most of the years we've been married. Just never worked out. And this year we finally could go. It was scheduled for the weekend of the spring game before the spring game was scheduled. So you can't blame me for that. It was, she says, well, she did ask me, what do you think of the spring game? Oh, I said, it'll be earlier. It's always earlier in April. Silly me. So I will be at Weekend to Remember. The beauty is that my new hearing aids have Bluetooth streaming.
Oh,
so when I was talking to you on the phone, it was through my hearing aids.
Nice.
And then I can listen to whatever I want. So yeah, YouTube TV will be playing in my back pocket during whatever session we're in at that time. And I will be at least listening to the game. And I got it set to record. And I don't know, he and I have been kind of noodling. Maybe we'll do like a rewatch party.
Oh, yeah.
Live stream, just sit here and watch the play-by-play that YouTube always puts out. So it's like a 40-minute video. I think we can get away with throwing that up on the screen and it not hurt us.
Probably.
So
Everything's
so
okay once.
Exactly. Everything's okay.
Shane
At least
Don't know
once.
unless we know.
That's what Shane always tells me. I can say anything once.
Well, we've got this segment we started off with way back in the day when we first started our podcast, Ravi, and it was fun facts. We used to just kind of come off the cuff with a fun fact about ourselves that people don't necessarily know. I decided to just take it a defined direction. So, all-time favorite show that you like to binge watch. It could be current. Is it something you're going to watch over and over and over again? If there's a go-to that I got to watch this tonight because my brain's fried and I need to unplug it.
Yeah, so I have a bunch of these because I'm kind of one of those people that watch television shows as like comfort food almost, where I come home kind of like you're saying, like you just need something to de-stress and unwind a little bit instead of, whatever other things normal people do. I come home and I put on a TV show that comforts me. And so I do this a ton. So obviously The Office is really high up there. Parks and Rec is really high up there. I know you said we were talking about this off air before. Brooklyn Nine-Nine, terrific. I'm rewatching New Girl right now. Love New Girl.
My wife's favorite.
I really love The Good Place. Is a really good show made by the same guy that did Parks and Rec and was a writer on The Office. Michael Schur. He's one of my favorites.
He also does Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah.
He's incredible. He's the best comedy showrunner going for
I
my
think so
money.
too. Yep.
Incredible stuff. And then I love Ted Lasso. I'm a big Ted Lasso guy. And then there's not a lot of like dramas that I follow. I do some of the kind of like Aaron Sorkin walk-in talks. Like I was a big West Wing guy for a while. And then there's a show called The Newsroom that was on HBO. It only did a couple seasons, but like that was pretty compelling. But probably if I have to pick one, I do edge out Parks and Rec over The Office.
Really?
A little bit.
Wow.
And I don't know why. I think it's so I think Parks and Rec strikes me as just like a little bit like sweeter. Like it's just a little bit more good-natured. And I love The Office, don't get me wrong. But I feel like it's just a little more almost like wholesome's not the right word, but like just like a little bit sweeter. And so like especially if I'm like unwinding or having a stressful day or something, I'll usually go Parks and Rec. But The Office is an all-timer too. I wouldn't have any complaints there.
How about you, Scott?
Well, it depends on what kind of show I'm wanting to get into. If it's just something that I want to detach and like get rid of stress and just watch, I can't go wrong with watching Rick and Morty.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah.
It's just so absurd and obscene and just so out there. It just like it helps me detach from the craziness that goes on in my life sometimes, where I can just watch something that's just purposefully absurd and funny and charismatic. And I could always go watch Rick and Morty. But when it comes to like binge watching, I wouldn't say that I binge watch like sitcoms all that much. I'll watch like a few of them, but then I just get bored with them and I have to move on to something else. My binge watching really comes into TV dramas. And I would say that like all-time favorite is Breaking Bad. I've watched it 3 times now, at different points in my life. And every single time I'm just extremely blown away with the storytelling and the character evolutions that take place and the redemption arcs and the just the heartbreaks. It's just it's such a perfect show. But the second one that I'm about to binge watch again because it was just so meaty and so good and just so compelling, blew my ever-loving mind. I don't know if you've seen the show Dark. It's a German drama series, and it is absolutely catastrophically mind-blowing. It is so well written. Of course, it's like it's a show about time travel, and so of course there's pseudoscience that has to be asserted into it. But when it comes to a compelling story about the interwoven complexities of what would happen if there was some sort of time traveling paradox, this show dives into it with such a keen sense of of awareness. It's absurd. It is so incredibly well written. It's only 3 seasons. And I had to pull up like a diagram of just the timelines and who is where and when and why.
It's like the Yellowstone universe.
It is.
See, that feels like one I'd have to like actually like lock in and pay attention to.
Yes, you have to, because
when I'm binge watching, I need to disconnect my brain a little bit more than that.
Because this isn't too much of a spoiler, but essentially, trigger warning to people that if you follow this guy and his name is Jonas, and essentially his father, the whole show starts, his father like kills himself. And it just starts with that. And then you find out very quickly that his father was actually an accidental time traveler that traveled into this era. And I'm trying to avoid any sort of like really, really compelling spoilers, but let's just say that there are some people in the show that you come to know, and then throughout you go, holy crap, that's like his son, or that's his dad, or that's a person who went missing a long time ago, or whatever. And the way that they put it all together, it's so good. It's in German. I highly recommend that you watch it.
Where do you see it? Where's it?
It's on Netflix.
Netflix.
Okay. And so I recommend watching it in German with subtitles, just because there's just so much emotion, like having an English dub. It fumbles my brain, and it kind of becomes sort of
takes you out of it.
It takes me out of it a little bit. So that is one that I'm about to binge watch again. I'm just finishing up Fallout right now. Really good show. But Breaking Bad is one of my all-time. Better Call Saul.
I was gonna say, how do you feel about Better Call Saul?
Honestly, I would almost argue that Better Call Saul is better.
I think you can make that argument.
And I'm not going to go into the why, because there's just so much to dive into. But Breaking Bad, because it's the OG, it's like, of course, like I got to pick Breaking Bad. But Better Call Saul was just written so well.
I kind of feel like it's I'm a big Star Wars nerd. So I kind of feel like it's a New Hope versus Empire Strikes Back situation. Like Empire Strikes Back is probably a better movie. But it can't exist without a New Hope.
Yes,
and I kind of feel
that's a great metaphor
about Better Call Saul, right? Yeah. It might be a better show, but it doesn't exist without Breaking Bad.
Yep.
So that's kind of how I feel.
And then you can't go wrong with the whole him shooting the crap with the security guys in Omaha, Nebraska, talking about Bo Pelini
getting in a bun.
And talking about, like, I really think that this guy is going to be good this year. Watch out for this guy. He's going to be good. And I'm like, I know these guys.
Well, and it's kind of funny because I think there's one of the scenes. There's a newspaper. It's an Omaha World Herald. And I can't remember who the writer is, but one of the writers that like still works in, it's either like, I think it was either Mike Schaefer or Brian Christopherson.
Oh,
I think it might not have been one of them, but it was one of those types of guys. I think they all work for the recruiting websites now, but it was one of those guys that it was like they were on the byline. You could see it in the episode of Better Call Saul.
Yes. And I think the headline was like, Nebraska did not perform or something like that. Like that's the headline is like Nebraska fell short. And
that was the best part is it was a real newspaper from Omaha from like 2010. It was incredible.
That's very cool.
What about you, Dad?
Oh, mine's easy. I don't put Breaking Bad stickers on my Stanley or
you got Stanley on your Stanley.
I've got Stanley on my Stanley right below the Stanley logo. Yeah. So for me, it's The Office. That's my unplug the brain. That's the white noise in the background if I just want to have something on the screen. When I was driving over the road, at first years ago, it was Sons of Anarchy.
Oh, yeah.
I watched it on Netflix. And then I watched it on Netflix to the point, this was before we had unlimited data and we couldn't stream, but like 2 gigabytes a month. And my wife's calling me going, what are you watching and why are you still watching it? So then I ended up buying the DVDs and all that. And I had it and I digitized it, put it on a hard drive so I could plug it into a TV and just watch whatever I wanted until I fell asleep, and set a timer on the TV. It'd turn off at 2:00, and I'd be sleeping. And then it became The Office. That was the binge show that my wife and I would watch when I got home off the road. That would be our binge date. And then it became Brooklyn Nine-Nine after we got done with The Office. And then it was Scrubs.
Oh, yeah. Scrubs is a good one.
And Scrubs is so good, so funny. The dream sequences got so stupid. But at the same time, you just laugh. You're like, yeah, I could see somebody like them thinking that way or dreaming that way. And then that morphs into Ted Lasso because it's the same guy that created it. And Ted Lasso, it's like, my God, the language they use over there. They say the C word like we say jerk over here, you know, and it's like, oh my gosh, how can I have friends that are like, I just can't get through the language. I'm like, you get through the language, if you can
it's incredible.
The heart is so beautiful in the show and in most of it. So I love that show. I'm in the middle of binging it again, watching it again. And
I've gone through it, half a dozen times probably. I mean, I just can't stop watching it.
And then whatever Star Wars show comes on next, I'll front to back. If they're stupid enough to release all of them at once, which they don't do that. The turkeys,
they've been pretty good about stringing you along there.
So I got it. You keep telling me I need to watch Breaking Bad. That's something I definitely need to do. I need to watch Breaking Bad and
Breaking Bad,
Dark, and
Breaking Bad's really good. But do Breaking Bad and then Better Call Saul. That's the way to go.
Yep.
Okay. Yellowstone. We really like Yellowstone too. I see it's gotten a little weird.
Clips on it on my like social media, and I'm like, oh, it seems interesting. I just never actually think to watch it.
Sons of Anarchy on horses because Taylor Sheridan, because he was involved in Sons of Anarchy too.
He's got a type, you know.
Yep. But Kevin Costner is just flipping dynamite.
I still need to watch Yellowstone. I still need to watch it.
He's so
I heard
good.
really good things about it.
Cole Hauser as Rip Wheeler.
I actually like Cole Hauser a lot.
If you've seen, there's a scene, and it's hard not to give it away, but if you've ever read about season 4, it's like toward the end of season 4, this whole, somebody said, go on Amazon and buy the Rip Wheeler, and it's this blue igloo cooler. Everybody that watched Yellowstone's like, oh my God, that's the funniest thing ever. I had no idea what it was because we were in the middle of season 4 binging it. And we get to the scene. I'm like, holy shit, now I get it. That's actually really, really funny. So yeah, blue igloo. It's something it's a signature moment in the series. It's brilliant. Cole Hauser's so good as Rip. Just so good. Anybody that's on that show. And of course, there's a guy that looks just like Jack Steller from Sons of Anarchy. That's one of the sons. He's got the long hair and the bushy beard. But it's a good show. I enjoy the show. And the 1923 was good. The prequel, one of the prequels, and then 1883 with Faith Hill and Tim McGraw was absolutely phenomenal.
Nice.
So I highly recommend those. But I think that's about it, guys. We went a lot longer. I thought at first we blazed through those first spring spring football topics. I thought, wow, we're gonna get out of here in under an hour. Sorry to keep you so long.
We haven't bored anybody to death either.
More people watching this show.
Sorry,
than we've ever had.
We aren't able to see your comments. If you guys are all discussing this on Twitter and telling me how Dark is clearly the greatest TV show ever written of all time, I can't see it, unfortunately. But
unfortunately, StreamYard and Twitter don't like to communicate when it comes to posting comments, but at least people can comment on the stream now on Twitter amongst themselves. So I'll have to go back and see if I can find that conversation. Dude, thanks so much, Robbie. Absolutely. This was absolute hoot. Making the trek to just talk Husker football. It's the best thing ever.
Of course.
I mean, it's only going to get better. I think you're dead right. It's only going to get better. Yeah. You just thought of something.
I'm going to put him on the spot.
Let's do it.
Way too early. Way too early.
We haven't done the show yet. Season prediction.
Well, we don't have to talk about it. We can just get Ravi's sense. Ceiling, floor. Way too early. 2024 win-loss record prediction.
So I haven't done ceiling and floor. I think it's a 9-win team. I think that's very doable. I'm going to say floor. I'm going to say 7. I know that's ambitious around here these days, but I'm going to say 7 is
around
the floor.
These parts.
I'm trying to get my Yellowstone right, around these parts.
Around these parts.
I'm going to say 7 is the floor. I'm going to say 10 is the ceiling.
Wow.
I can see like a realistic ceiling. I can see a world where they win 10 games and it's like nothing crazy happened. Like I can see that. The only game I look at on the schedule and I go, yeah, I don't know how they win that one is probably Ohio State.
Ohio State, yeah.
Because that team's loaded. Like they just are.
Mm-hmm.
But USC's gonna be, I mean, I don't know if rebuild is the right term, but you saw that team lose 4 or 5 games last year with the best quarterback prospect in quite a while on their team.
Mm-hmm.
I still don't know if they can play defense, and I know Caleb Williams isn't back, so
yeah,
I have no reason to be afraid of USC this year, except for that, the name on the jersey.
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea what UCLA is. Then Wisconsin and Iowa, those are their 5 hardest games. Ohio State, USC, UCLA, Wisconsin, Iowa. 4 of those, I don't have any reason to believe they can't win.
Mm-hmm.
Ohio State, yeah, until further notice, I'm going to count that as a loss every time. That's fine. But, you tell me they win all but one of those other 4, okay. Like I can believe that pretty easily. So I mean, I think 10-2 is a realistic upside for this team. And then, yeah, if they don't win 7 games, I'd be really shocked.
That's
I love
ambitious. I love it too. I love the fact that you're drinking the Kool-Aid.
I'm drinking the Roulade, as
Drinking
they
the
say.
Roulade.
I've been listen. If I didn't back it up with wins predictions, then it'd just be all talk. I'd be just like Trev, where nothing I say means anything. So
nice parting
on
shot.
that note,
I salute you, sir. That was awesome. Thanks again for coming out, man. This was an absolute blast. How can folks follow you on social media and follow the show?
Yeah, so I'm at Ravi Lulla. That's RALULLA on Twitter. I think that's what I am on everything. But Twitter is mostly where I post things, especially sports related. If you follow me on Instagram, you're just going to see a lot of pictures of my dogs and probably me in suits, but that's about it. So
yeah,
I don't know.
A lot of suits in front of the mirror with your phone like this.
It's the same picture every time. It's just a different suit. And then a lot of my dogs and occasionally my cat. But yeah, Twitter at Ravi Lulla. And then the show is Hurrdat Sports Radio every weekday morning, 7 to 10 a.m. on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, and then KFOR in Lincoln from 9 to 10. But we live stream Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, just Hurrdat Sports. You'll find it. It's super easy to find. And make sure you follow Hurrdat Sports too. They've got a lot of great stuff going on. They cover stuff in a way that I think is super interesting and compelling, and they tell cool stories with a bunch of cool people. So make sure you follow all of them as well.
Absolutely. How about you, Scott? I know. Are you back on Twitter yet?
Nope.
Okay. Well, that solves that. You can follow the show at GenRedPod on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. So make sure you do that. Also, genredpod.com is our website. genredpod@gmail.com is our email address. And he's Scott. I'm Ken. Together we're Generation Red. And we are here to chronicle Nebraska's eventual return to greatness, one podcast at a time, because there is no place like Nebraska.
And Iowa's corn sucks. Period.
That's it. It sucks worse than Trev leaving for Texas A&M.
I mean, he
said that.
He is an Iowa guy originally, so
yeah,
I don't, you know. The shoe fits.
The shoe fits. Absolutely, it does. If the
food. Oh, okay. Yeah. I was going to finish that for
That's
you.
an old joke. That's an old joke.
Okay.
It's pretty funny. I'll have to remember it somewhere down the road and not tell it on the air. Anyway, God bless y'all. Go Big Red, and we will see you next time. Not sure when that will be, but hopefully sometime in May.
Go Big Red.
Go Big Red.